Hello and welcome back to the When You're Podcast, the podcast for when you're doing anything. Today we're talking about when you're watching Anatomy of a Fall. Honestly, guys, this movie was so... It was really one of those movies that you wish that you had kind of, you wish was everywhere. Or like, I think I kind of wanted a little bit more hype about it, but I guess because it's a quote-unquote foreign film, it's French and also English, but it's also kind of like I'm not going to say primarily French, but I do like that aspect of it. But overall, I felt like this movie was it was really beautifully done. It was crafted very well. And there were often times when I was watching it, there could be multiple moments where I was watching it and I kind of felt so deep into the story, into what was going on, that I took I don't want to say a pause. I did pause it, but after very specific scenes, because they were so beautifully well done, they were so well acted, and I thought about it after the fact. You know, I tried to watch the movie without pausing as much as I could, but you know, there were certain circumstances that I had to deal with it. But either way, I was watching the movie, and it didn't occur to me at the time, but the reason why I felt so connected to it, I felt like I didn't feel like I was watching a movie per se. I paused it because I had to deal with other stuff, but I felt like the movie it felt so real because I didn't know any of the actors in the movie. They didn't have any kind of star quality to them. I mean, they're all stars, they're all amazing. But like when I watched Oppenheimer, you kind of have an idea of like, oh, I've seen Cillian Murphy, and I've seen Matt Damon, and I've seen Emily Blunt, and I've seen Robert Downey Jr., and I've seen Rami Malek, and I've seen all of these different people, you know? You can just kind of point out people and see the roles that they're playing, you know what I'm saying? It's just like, oh, it's Matt Damon acting. And this one, it had none of that, you know? And it does heavily weigh because it's also a foreign film. It's a French-speaking film. And I felt like that really gave it a lot of weight to it, and I didn't know any of the actors. So it just felt a lot more real to me. It didn't actually feel like I was watching a movie, or that they were definitely acting, don't get me wrong, but I didn't think about that until after the fact. But anyways, Anatomy of a Fall. If you haven't watched it, it's incredibly amazing. I definitely recommend it. It's available on Hulu, I believe. But I want to focus on the overall plot of it. Is a man, a husband, a father, dies from what appears to be a fall. How he fell and who potentially might have killed him are the questions that the movie explores, right? It's, did the wife kill him, or did he kill himself, is essentially the main plot of the movie. And it becomes a bit of a courtroom drama towards the later half of the movie. So we kind of get we're open to the movie, and it's essentially the day of his death, the day that he died. And we see his wife, who is being interviewed by a college student, who is also a woman, and they're trying to have this talk, but he keeps on working upstairs, and by working, I mean he's doing renovations, so he's like, he's trying to build spare rooms for, I think, a bed and breakfast that they're going to own, so that they can like have people rent it out or come by and stay, and so on and so forth. So he plays this music, which is 50 Cent's PIMP, Pimp, and it's just instrumentals. It's not him actually rapping per se. And we also get a glimpse of kind of their home life, or who else is in the house. And we see that they have a dog, and they also have a kid, a son, who is blind. And I think it's kind of pointed out in the movie that he's partially blind. I mean, he can kind of see, he kind of can't see, but I'm just going to go off the assumption that he's blind and that he's okay, he's figuring it out. Anyways, we see that the interview kind of ends because they couldn't have any peace or quiet. You know, the two of them, the wife and the student, they couldn't really talk over the music. And it was kind of like, it didn't feel like the right setting, you know? So the student leaves, and I guess kind of around the same time or a little bit after, the son takes his dog out for a walk. And they're walking, and then eventually the son comes back home, and the dog is kind of barking at something, runs towards something, and the son is kind of like, what's going on? And he starts feeling around, and it's his father's dead body, and it looks like he might have fallen. And he's calling out for his mom, and she comes rushing out, and she's like in a panic herself. She's like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And she calls the police, and they arrive, and they look at the scene. They examine everything that happened. So the opening gives us so much. It's the day of his murder, and there's little pieces of context, or like social context or cues that we can pick up about the scene just by that opening of like what everybody's feeling in the room. There's a sort of tension between the husband and the wife. The student can pick up on it but doesn't want to elaborate on it. The son is leaving the house, which could be looked at as him trying to avoid any confrontation or any kind of tension. And it could also just simply be him, I want to leave. I'm ready to go. I have to leave. So anyways, we see the aftermath of the dad's death, the husband's death. The police arrive, they take his body, they do an autopsy report, and at the time they were like, well, we can't confirm if he committed suicide or if he was murdered, if he was killed, if he was hit in the head with an object and he fell down to the bottom at the bottom, and that's how he died. So there are any number of ways to look at it. He could have fallen to his own death by himself, or potentially the wife hits him over the head and pushes him over the balcony or the rail where he was working, because he was working upstairs, and he falls to his death that way. And she's just trying to play like, oh, I didn't do it. So anyways, immediately the grief or the sadness of his death kicks in for his son, who is really taking it harshly. He's like, man, that was my dad. He was homeschooling his son. He was taking care of him. They were both taking care of him, but the dad was primarily working with his son and homeschooling him and trying to help him out by teaching him and helping him out with his disability as well. So there's a sadness from his son, which is like this deep sadness and depression and this like inability to get out of bed, and just like, I don't want to do anything. I miss my dad. He's dead. What do I do now? He's having a very difficult time processing it. And the police, they're looking at the wife as a suspect. And the only one who can really give any kind of clues or any kind of witness statement is their blind son. And that's where the conflict lies, and the implications of like, okay, who killed them? How did this happen? What's going on? So that's kind of what we're left with, is like, who killed him? What happened to this man? And at first I was kind of like, well, you know, you I kind of like trying to figure out the plot. Um, I try to figure out like if there's any way that she's keeping things hidden or if she's not telling the whole truth or there's something going on, you know? And I immediately go like, well, it could be like a half of a truth. You know what I'm saying? Like she didn't directly kill them, but maybe indirectly killed them. You know what I'm saying? Like she didn't literally hit him in the head with a hammer per se, and more so the like maybe she pushed him or it was a bit of an accident where something fell on him and that kind of knocked him out and she needed to like hide it. I was kind of looking at it as like she's half telling the truth, half lying. Like she didn't kill him, but she did kill him, kind of a way. Like, oh no, he tripped and fell, and then, but because she did something, you know. So it was kind of like this half truth, half lie. But the literal death isn't really what's important. But we'll see. Next is understanding the guy, the husband and the father's death. It's understanding like all of the pieces of the puzzle, you know, especially for the police and for like a trial or a jury to figure out like how did he really die. This is what we have to understand, you know. How did he really die? If the autopsy can't confirm that he committed suicide, then there's a possibility that he was murdered by his wife, a vengeful wife, a unloving wife, a hateful wife. You know what I'm saying? Try to spin the story, understand the full scope, understand and get the truth of it all. So they recreate the scene of like exactly like the day of, this is what he was doing, this is where he was, this is what was happening. They recreate the day, the scene, and how he died. And they do this through many ways. They plan ways in which if she murdered him, they play it out, and if he tossed himself over to kill himself, how that would look. So they use dummies, and they also use like they try to figure out sort of references. So I guess they would have to get somebody of the husband's size or like a dummy of his size and play out the scene of like she hits him over the head and she pushes him over and he falls, you know? So they do that. That's the police's job, is to like figure out all theories, all ways in which he could have died. And then they also try to figure out their son. His name's Daniel. And they try to figure out, okay, well, what was he doing? What does he know? You know, maybe he's hiding a little bit of the truth to protect his mom, or maybe he doesn't want to explain the whole thing because he didn't see it, so he can't be sure, right? Like, they're trying to figure out, like, where were you and what do you know? So there are multiple times where, well, not multiple times. There's one instance where he's just a kid and he's just, what really bothers me is the confusion of it all, but I understand it's like he's just a kid. You know what I mean? I've done the same thing multiple times where it's like you say one thing and then you're like, well, I was confused and it was actually another way. So he says that he was outside when he heard his mom and dad quote unquote arguing, or like they were talking over the music, the PIMP music by 50/50. And he could hear them outside because he was going to walk his dog. But then they recreate it with the music playing and them arguing, even shouting at each other, and he can't hear them. He goes inside and he's like, oh, I mistook. I made a mistake. I was actually inside when I heard them. And they're like, You see, he's changing his story now. He's going completely a different way. And I didn't really like that, but I was like, he's just a kid, you know. He doesn't know any better, and he's like, the whole thing sucks. And so they eventually come up with some theories or some reason as to like, well, why did he die? You know, why did the father die? And there were two big plausible theories: is that he was sad, or he hated himself and he committed suicide, or two, his wife hated him and didn't want to be with him, and so she killed him and tried to cover it up. And she told her son to lie as well, so that way nobody, or it was like a very passionate argument between the two, and she kills him and then and then leaves the body there for her son to find, and then basically, you know, that's the end of it. So those are the two big theories, and because of that, she's implicated for his murder. They charge her and they arrest her, and because of that, he needs a carer. So the court orders a carer to take care of Daniel, to help him, to feed him, to help him do certain things. So I don't know what they did for his education. Maybe they figured out a program for it. I don't know, because the difference between when she gets arrested in the trial is like a year. I don't know if she's literally in jail. I think maybe she gets out on bail or whatnot, but essentially there's a year difference. So I don't know what they do for him for school, but I do know that they do get a carer for him. That's all I know. And then they go to trial. And the trial is so interesting because they have to, in order to line up the dots of his murder, the prosecution has to prove that she hated her husband, or quote unquote that she is capable of violence. She's capable of hurting her husband, of being mean towards him, being a bad wife per se, and somebody who has motive or reasons to kill her husband. Where the defense has to kind of prove that, like, look, she's just his wife, right? They argue, they fight, but ultimately his death was his choice and his choice alone. And because it was his choice, she can't really be the one who has to... She's not a murderer, is essentially their defense. It's just like, I didn't kill him. He did it to himself, and I can't be held responsible for that, or at least for this thing. You know what I'm saying? I did not murder him. I'm not a murderer. So those are the two sides that are going to be debated. And what's really interesting is the way that they have to understand the relationship between the two of them. Understand that they both live together. How did they connect? What was their bond? What was their relationship like? And you kind of have to look at try to understand the whole picture of the relationship rather than specific moments or maybe bad moments of each of them and their relationships. You know what I'm saying? So it becomes this back and forth in the courtroom, and it becomes extremely difficult to articulate certain points, especially when the wife, she has to speak French, and her French isn't that great, so she has to say certain words, and she's kind of like, I can't speak freely if I can't speak in English. So she speaks in English, and it kind of has to be this back and forth between the two of them. And what was really interesting, or where I felt like there was a real push in the story and that I really enjoyed watching, was when they brought in the husband's therapist, who he was seeing. I don't know how often, but he was seeing, or maybe he was just a friend. And they're kind of discussing their relationship and how he felt about his wife. And they brought up, she had an affair, she was sleeping with other people, she had relationships with other people, but those relationships were quote unquote not affairs because she told him about it and he said, all right, or he accepted that that's what she was doing, or they weren't secrets, they weren't hidden. She told him and he kind of said, okay, they let it happen. He let it happen, and she did have an affair one time. And it's an affair because he didn't know about that relationship. But the way that he speaks, so the way he speaks about her and the way that they challenge each other is him saying, well, I know him because he told me about your relationship. And she said, you know pieces and you know things that he feels. But feeling isn't the whole truth. It's not the whole thing. You can paint a canvas red and you can get multiple interpretations from it. You know what I'm saying? It could be angry, it can be loving and passionate and fierce. It can be hot and, full of fear and joy. You know what I mean? You can look at it through multiple different ways. And she says, if I had a therapist as well, or somebody who I was talking to, they could frame, my relationship with him just as negatively as you're framing my relationship with him. You know what I mean? Anybody can twist the facts. Anybody can make a relationship look terrible on the, based off purely what they feel, but it doesn't capture the whole relationship, It doesn't capture how we fell in love at the beginning. It doesn't capture our first date. It doesn't capture our first, it doesn't capture our first apartment living together. It doesn't capture the birth of our son. It doesn't capture the full, it just doesn't capture the full relationship. You know what I mean? And I like that exchange because oftentimes do I watch movies and they focus on a singular point of the aspects of like maybe a romance. You know what I'm saying? I feel this way with like action movies where they rush the romance so that way they can like make us feel connected or bonded to certain characters. It's like, oh, they found love and now they're happy-go-lucky. It's like I didn't see them. I feel like there needs more time for romance, for relationships to really blossom and bloom, which is why shows like certain sitcoms where you see romance as like a plot of the finale, where like the finale, the couple finally gets together. You know what I'm saying? Like those kind of romances are earned over the course of however long the show runs. But anyways, throughout the whole trial, we see that everything that happens is not the full totality of their relationship. They had problems, sure, but that doesn't make her capable of killing her husband. And then they bring out these audio recordings, these recorded conversations between the husband and wife. And coincidentally, they have an audio recording from the day before his death. Okay? And there was a little bit of a debate. Well, not a debate. There was a conversation had about keeping her son Daniel out of the courtroom so he didn't have to hear about the affair, about them arguing, about what they argued about kind of the tension that was growing between their marriage. They didn't want him to hear it. And he made a good argument, which was, whether you keep me in or out, I'm going to find out. With the internet, with radio, with people are going to talk about this trial, and I can either be there and listen to it in person, or I can wonder about it at home. You know what I mean? Like, So letting me in is the smart choice, because then I can actually be involved. I can actually be a part of it all. And I really like that argument. And so he's in the courtroom and he's hearing the audio recordings, and it's this amazing back and forth dialogue between two people who are really struggling with their relationship or understanding where their lives are going. You know what I mean? The frustration that comes with guilt, and I'll explain why, is the husband feels tremendous guilt for his son's blindness. It wasn't directly his fault, but as his father, he had a duty to go pick up his son from school, and he kind of decided, well, I want to focus on my writing. I want to focus on my book. I'm on a hot streak. I can't just, if I leave to go pick up my son, I'm going to lose my hot streak. I want to keep working at this. So he chooses to stay home, send somebody else to go pick him up, I think. And in that kind of way, his son gets hit by some sort of motorcycle or whatever. I don't remember the exact details of it, but he gets into an accident. He loses his sight and he's blind. So ever since then, he's kind of held this guilt in himself, which is like, man, it's because of me that he's blind, and he feels pity for him. And it kind of, because of that guilt, he weighs it down on himself, and it creates this tension between the two of them. One where the wife is like resentful towards him because it's like, well, you caused this, you know what I mean? Like, you caused our son to be blind because you wanted to focus on this writing thing. Not that that's a bad thing, but you have a responsibility here, and because you didn't commit to your responsibility, now we're in this situation where our son is disabled. You know what I mean? You caused it. And it's also part of the reason why he chose to homeschool Daniel. It's part of the reason why feels like he doesn't have enough time to do what he wants. It's because he's putting a lot of excuses and doubt, fear, resentment, and guilt, overweighing guilt for his son's blindness. And it's just this constant back and forth between the two of them where she is successful. She takes excerpts, or she takes, she takes ideas of his and creates her own books with it, which is something that she asked if she could do, and he accepts, and she does it, and it's very successful, and he holds resentment over that success, and he feels like a failure because he doesn't get to live out his dreams or do what he wants. He wants to be a writer, an author, sell millions of books, and be adored and loved. But instead, he's a teacher who's unfulfilled, unhappy, and guilty because he ruined his son's life, And from another perspective, the wife, the mom, she's kind of looked at as like, she isn't as concerned about their son. She isn't as loving. She takes from other people, and she's kind of like doing things however she wants by, abusing her husband's love for her to go out and have an affair and have relationships with other people and get to live this exciting and successful life. Whereas he's like a stay-at-home dad, is miserable in his job and just doesn't feel happy. But again, it's not the full scope of their relationship. So in the court of law, it's just trying to figure out what was their relationship to one another. And the prosecution does an amazing job with questions and with talking to one another and to framing the relationship as one thing to fit their side. And they do a marvelous job. I really credit the actors in this movie again. But nobody stands out to this film more to me than Daniel, the blind boy. Oh my gosh. He was absolutely fantastic. And the movie the movie kind of makes you, I mean, of course it makes you pick a side, what do you believe? But nothing matters more in the movie than his opinion, his understanding of what happens, in their relationship. And he's learning so much about his mom and his dad and their relationship that it kind of takes away some of the innocent eyes that we look at our parents for. You know what I'm saying? Like, we don't see our parents, when we're younger at least, we tend not to look at our parents as flawed or as deeply, we don't look at them with this much complexity, but they do have all that complexity in them. It's just that when we're a kid, we just see them as like, they're our parents and we love them, and we see them with these innocent eyes of like, you can do everything and you pay for everything and you take care of me and you love me and, you drive and you do this and you do that. And it kind of, by learning and hearing all of this information, it kind of takes that away from him. And there was a moment where, they were trying to frame, or they were trying to the defense was trying to prove that the husband was suicidal because he was overdosing on medicine or on prescription drugs. And Daniel didn't know about that. So he decides to try his own, test out his own theory. And he has this dog, and the dog, hey, shout out the dog. The dog was also fantastic. That dog deserves an Oscar, okay? I don't know if they do animal Oscars, but man, that dog deserves one, all right? Top tier acting from that dog. So anyways, he does his own experiment with the quote-unquote drugs, the aspirin or whatnot, and he feeds some to his dog. And by feeding some to his dog, he's trying to figure out, like, what's going on, what's happening, trying to understand why the dog is acting a certain way. And in the end, he came to the conclusion that his mom is kind of telling the truth, that, his father passed out and threw up and was all over the place, and that his dog licked the vomit, or ate the vomit per se, where the drugs were, and he got the same kind of response. So his experiment came true. His experiment played out, where it was like his dog probably ate his dad's vomit from trying to overdose, right? And the medicine that the drugs that he gave his dog made him react the same way. So now he's in this, I don't know what to believe. I don't know what to do. Help me out here. He's talking to his carer, to the court-ordered carer. And she basically tells him this, like, when you have two choices, you really just got to make a decision and decide for yourself what you believe, with where either side can be probable, right? And man, the boy who plays Daniel, man, he has this he does this amazing job with his emotions, where he just makes you feel like lost and hurt and confused and doesn't fully understand what's going on in his life. So overall, he has two choices. He can either believe that his dad committed suicide, or he can believe that his mom murdered his dad. Which does he decide, Which one does he fully understand, or does he comprehend? And at the end of it all, maybe I shouldn't spoil it. It's really up to interpretation, but essentially, his understanding, or what he decides, is he decides to tell the court that he doesn't understand why his mom would kill his why his mom would kill his dad. It doesn't make sense, you know. Yeah, they had problems, sure, but he, you know, she, it just doesn't work. It doesn't fit his understanding. But his dad being depressed makes sense, and he finishes by telling a story about how his dog was sick, like in the experiment he played out or he tried. And in explaining it, he kind of told the story about the dad telling him that his dog is going to die someday, and when that day comes, you need to be ready, you know? You need to be strong, and you need to be able to hold your head up high to be a good, you know, to keep on living your life. And he essentially tells everybody in the courtroom that, like, he was really just talking about himself, you know? And at the end of the trial, the mom is freed. She's a free woman. She goes back home. But there's this holding tension, or this sad realization that her son is no longer going to look at her the same way. You know, he's not going to have the same kind of innocent eyes that used to look at her. Now he sees her for the complex human that she is. And the end feels like the trial is over. She's freed. She is proven in a court of law that she's not a murderer. But for us, the audience, we can still view or have this feeling of, like, unsatisfied. You know what I mean? Yeah, she got off, but at what cost? You know, what happened? You know, this was such a life-changing thing. So I say, when you're watching Anatomy of a Fall, be prepared for some intense dialogue, and be ready to see, get ready to look at the overall scope of the movie and put yourself into their shoes, on either person's, and make a decision for yourself and really choose for yourself, where do you align, you know? How would you defend yourself? How would you prosecute somebody, you know? How would you react if you were Daniel? Put yourselves in the shoes of the characters and kind of see for yourself, well, where do I fit? Where would I stand? How can I change my life or learn from this story? And I feel like when we look at it that way, or like if you rewatch it, you know, you can kind of feel a lot more weight in everybody. You can feel a lot more complexity, a lot more of a gray area. It's not so black and white as we sometimes make things out to be. So anyways, yeah. Anatomy of a Fall, great movie. Definitely go watch it. So thank you guys so much for listening, and I'll talk to you guys all next time. Thank you.